Good afternoon and welcome back to Telesur English. This is from the South. Our news brief from Caracas, Venezuela. I'm Ray Gomez and we start this new edition right now. Catalonia is preparing to announce its independence from Spain, according to the region's president Carles Puigdemont. The independence could be declared next Monday after the authorities finish tallying the votes from last Sunday's referendum. The Catalan president's announcement follows a statement by Spanish King Felipe VI, where he accused Catalonia's leaders of shattering democratic principles and dividing Catalan society. The king's statement also coincided with protests by tens of thousands against the violent police crackdown during Sunday's ballot.
After each era, we have come out more reinforced. Today, we are closer to independence than a month ago, and it is not a matter of calendar. Not only because we are making progress in the calendar that we have set, but also because each week and each mistake the government makes, we have gathered more social strength, more of a majority in Catalonia that doesn't accept this situation. Therefore, a definitive error like the state intervention of our autonomy, the arrest of a member of the government, or my own arrest can be a definitive error.
For an update on the situation in Catalonia, Joan Ortiz Zara sent this report.
In the
current situation here, the news headlines are changing very fast. The general strike yesterday is not even news today, even though we should say it happened without any casualties. What's news today is that Carles Puigdemont announced to the BBC that the independence of Catalonia will soon be proclaimed in the regional parliament. We don't know for certain if it'll happen by the end of this week or at the beginning of the next one, but he assured us that there will be more political activity this weekend. Nevertheless, the members of the parliament from the pro-independence Junts pel Sí party have asked Puigdemont to give an explanation to the parliament on how the result from the referendum will be applied. After that, we could possibly have more details. In any case, what's still news today is a speech by King Philip VI last night on TV, in which he made some people happy and some unhappy. Basically those who shared the ideology of the Spanish government or the popular socialist parties, but he didn't please the Catalans and pro-independence forces, nor those on the left who aren't happy with his thoughts. He accused the Generalitat of breaking with the law and democracy, and also that Catalonia was being unloyal and irresponsible and threatening to break the unity and sovereignty of Spain. But he didn't mention anything about the people injured during the police repression against the referendum voters. He also didn't say anything about the need for a dialogue. We have to remember that President Puigdemont himself said on Sunday that Catalonia has earned European respect, and thanks to the support of the over 2 million Catalonians, relations between the Catalan government and the Spanish government are not an internal issue anymore, but a European Union issue. We'll keep across what happens at the European Parliament in Strasbourg, where today there is a debate on the situation in Catalonia. That's already started, but will continue for a few more hours, so we'll bring you more on that to share with our viewers.
Thank you, Joan Ortiz Zara from Barcelona. And now let's go to the Caribbean islands. 2 weeks after Hurricane Maria tore across Puerto Rico, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, visited the island on Tuesday. He arrived to an atmosphere of criticism and rejection from many sectors of society that questioned his administration's response to the emergency.
Members of NGOs rallied outside of the Puerto Rico government's emergency command center in San Juan.
No colony, no Trump! No colony, no Trump!
They were protesting against the 5-hour visit by the U.S. President Donald Trump.
What we have seen is a heavy military presence and the federal aid state authorities' incapacity and ineptitude in handling such important issues as water and food distribution for those who can't afford it or don't have any transport.
It's been 2 weeks since Maria, that devastating extreme weather event, and the delivery of aid is still painfully slow.
We don't have water or food for the most affected people, and the news we get is shocking. I heard the government of Puerto Rico say on the news that everything is okay, while Trump insults Puerto Ricans, and yet we are saying thanks. Outside of San Juan, there's just chaos.
On his arrival, the US president berated Puerto Ricans for the money his administration has spent on the island's recovery.
Now, I hate to tell you, Puerto Rico, but you've thrown our budget a little out of whack because we've spent a lot of money on Puerto Rico.
Despite the deployment of federal and military personnel, the aid isn't reaching the most affected areas. The communities have to face alone the devastation left by Maria.
The government has totally collapsed. The island is being militarized. The communities have already understood that the aid is not going to come, so we're getting organized, workers, students, and religious groups.
The rebuilding and repair efforts are also slow. Only 5% of the population has electricity, and more than half of the population doesn't have access to drinking water, a situation that threatens public health.
The whole population of Barbuda had to be evacuated after Hurricane Irma destroyed almost all the island. While the tiny island remains uninhabitable, some residents try to go back and spend the day checking on their belongings. Our correspondent Natalia Margarita has the story, but first, the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown, told Telesur that he hopes some residents in Barbuda will be able to return to the island in the coming weeks.
Well, we are presently cleaning up the actual cleanup of the debris in Barbuda. Should be completed within the next week. We have treated the island for vector-borne and waterborne diseases, and we should be able to start to transition a small amount of people in Barbuda to relocate to Barbuda. We are trying to get the electricity and water back within about 4 weeks. Excuse me, and it will take some time to transition all of them back to Barbuda, but we believe that we can do so systematically. Within the next couple of weeks, we should have perhaps a few hundred Barbudans going back to help with the rebuilding, to repair the homes that are salvageable. And also, we are in the process of putting together a new housing project for Barbuda because a number of people are left homeless. So we'll have probably about 200 people or so, or just over 200 people living on Barbuda to help with the actual cleanup and the rebuilding.
17 years ago, she came from the Dominican Republic to Barbuda seeking a better future. Now Hurricane Irma has left her with nothing. Even though Amparo knew her house was reduced to rubble, she came back to the island hoping to find her most valuable possession.
Oh, my little dog, what happened? Did they do something to you? The dog feels the same way I do, and I know he is really good. I adopted him when he was a puppy. And it's very different from having a bed or any furniture. The important thing here is life.
As the access to Barbuda remains restricted, Amparo is one of the many residents seeking to check on their houses and belongings. Every day they try to reach the island in the boats that are carrying workers.
We're here to assist in providing some solar energy for the communications team and also to evaluate our installation that we have over here. We have a 150 kilowatt installation that we did over here, so we're here to assess the damages and to determine what's our next course from here.
As time passes, those who want to go back are getting more and more anxious, but as long as basic services are not restored, moving back really is not an option.
It's like a nightmare, seeing it over and over, and again it's bring back sad memories to feel the hurricane and now the damage it done, it's like a disaster, you know.
Barbudans are aware their homeland is vulnerable to storms and hurricanes. However, Irma will be always remembered as the worst in their national history. From the Caribbean island of Barbuda, Natalia Margarita, Telesur.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. The lower house of the U.S. Congress has approved a law known as the NICA Act, which limits the Nicaraguan government's access to loans from multilateral bodies. Our correspondent in Managua, Maria Jose Diaz, has more.
The law initiative known as NICA Act was approved yesterday by the United States Chamber of Representatives. The law, which will impose a series of conditions that will decide how much the United States can approve to Nicaragua, has been labeled as irrational, offensive, and harmful by the Nicaraguan government. They also considered the initiative as a violation of Nicaragua's sovereignty and a denial for all political, social, and cultural processes of the country. The initiative will need to be approved by the Senate and then signed by U.S. President Donald Trump in order for it to be validated. Meanwhile, the local government has assured the Nicaraguan people of its unchanging commitment to democracy, nationwide harmony, togetherness, understanding, and prosperity for the country.
Thank you, Maria Jose Diaz from Managua, Nicaragua. Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez on Tuesday slammed the U.S. expulsion of Cuban diplomats as unjustified, unfounded, and unacceptable in the deepening row over mysterious attacks on staff at the U.S. Embassy in Havana. Rodriguez said there was no evidence of the alleged incidents, nor of their causes or origin, adding that no suspects had been identified. The attacks, which U.S. officials initially suggested could have been carried out with some sort of covert acoustic device, allegedly affected at least 22 U.S. Embassy members over the past few months. Washington's relations with Havana were only fully restored in 2015 after a half-century Cold War breakdown and have deteriorated since President Donald Trump took office in January.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs strongly protests and condemns this unfounded and unacceptable decision, as well as the pretext used to justify it. It is the second time that the U.S. government reacts in a hasty, inappropriate, and unthinking way without having any evidence, and before the conclusion of the investigation that is still in progress. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs categorically rejects any responsibility of the Cuban government in the alleged incidents and reiterates once again that Cuba has never perpetrated, nor will it ever perpetrate attacks of any sort against diplomatic officials or their relatives. Neither has it ever allowed, nor will it ever allow its territory to be used by third parties with that purpose. The ministry emphasizes that the U.S. government announced decision has an eminently political character. The ministry urges the competent authorities of the U.S. government not to continue politicizing this matter, which can provoke an undesirable escalation and would ratify and reverse even more bilateral relations.
Lawyers for Ecuadorian Vice President Jorge Glass are preparing to present an appeal for the jailed politician. Glass presented himself to the authorities after a court ordered his preventive detention in relation to the Odebrecht corruption scheme, where Odebrecht officials allegedly paid $33 million to Ecuadorian officials. The vice president said that the order was a shameful abuse against him, but he would comply because he trusts that justice will prevail. Glass insists there is no evidence of the alleged crime. So let's go live to Quito, and my colleague Sayini Gray Suyine, hello. The Alianza País party members are calling for transparency while investigating Vice President Jorge Glass. Please give us an update.
Transparency is actually very important to Ecuador's Vice President, Jorge Glass. On Monday, we spoke to you about the preventative detention that the Attorney General had requested because he wants to hold Vice President Glass and his uncle, Ricardo Rivera, in a pre-trial detention. That request was granted by the national courts. Now, just to be clear, a preventative detention is not a punitive detention. And it doesn't mean that either gentleman had done anything wrong or should it prejudice the case against them. And when Vice President Glass received the order that the detention had been granted, he presented himself to authorities in Guayaquil and was transferred via aircraft to Quito, where he's now being held in prison. It's really important to reiterate that the Vice President maintains his innocence, that he says he's done nothing wrong, and that he is fully confident that the courts, the Ecuadorian courts, will fully vindicate him. Now, it's been a very busy week in Ecuadorian politics because also on Monday, President of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno, launched a national consultation or plebiscite or referendum. He wants the people of Ecuador to focus on 7 key areas. One of the most controversial is Article 3 or Question 3, which seeks to limit presidential re-election. Some people, even within the president's own party, País Alliance, believe that it's meant to block the immediate past president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, from running for re-election. The people have to make that determination. Some of the other questions that he wants the Ecuadorian people to investigate or answer is whether limits on the speculative tax on the sale of land should remain, whether persons who have been convicted of corruption should be allowed to run for public office, and whether the protective zone in the Yasuni rainforest, the Ecuadorian rainforest, should be expanded. This plebiscite, once whatever decisions the people make on any of the 7 questions are legally binding. So the Ecuadorian constitution will be amended to reflect those changes. We believe it may take place in December, but we're not sure. As soon as we get confirmation on the date, Ray, we will be back here letting you know what that date is or give you any update on any of the issues that we've discussed and that we're covering constantly here on Tell Us Your English. So keep on viewing. I would encourage people who are interested in these stories to keep on viewing Tell Us Yours television or social media networks. And that's it for me here in Quito. Back to you in Caracas, Ray.
Thank you, Suyine. Excellent report. Goodbye. Thousands of people have taken to the streets in cities across Brazil to protest at the government's plans to privatize many public companies. The details on the Rio de Janeiro protest in this report.
Thousands of Brazilians marched in defense of the national patrimony, which is threatened with privatization by Michel Temer's government. In Rio de Janeiro, the mobilization began outside the headquarters of the energy company Eletrobras and other companies that risk being privatized.
Privatize the public savings banks means hurting the Brazilian people. It has a deep economic impact. We are against the privatization of this bank and of all public companies. If it is public, it belongs to the people.
Different social movements joined the march, along with public sector workers.
The bourgeoisie of our country is a bourgeoisie committed to coups. Just when the people win rights and dignity, they think that the country has to play a submissive role in the world.
Some people are also demanding other kinds of production, like energy, that doesn't damage traditional communities. These are members of the movement of people affected by dams at their 8th national meeting.
It's important for us to occupy the streets of Rio de Janeiro, to say no to dams, especially the dams in the Amazon.
The protesters made their way to the head offices of Petrobras, the state-controlled oil company that turned 64 on Tuesday. It too is affected by the government measures.
What they are doing with our company is just to give away a strategic company to any other country. Give Brazilian oil to an international capital.
Former President Lula spoke out and again denounced the conservative sector's persecution against him.
Lula is now an idea shared by millions of people. They know that Lula has been reborn in millions of men and women who are all now Lula. People who want freedom, oil self-sufficiency and sovereignty.
Lula da Silva is promising to work on a referendum to revoke the privatization policies of the de facto government, a project that is possible if his millions of supporters continue to mobilize and put pressure on the Brazilian Congress.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. The Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has called for an international cooperation to stabilize oil prices and overcome the challenges facing the Venezuelan economy. Maduro was speaking at the International Energy Forum in Russia. Venezuela has been a strategic actor on the energy scene, driving efforts to improve the international market. Maduro said that to the detriment of oil-producing economies, the global oil market has been destabilized partly by the increase in natural gas and shale oil production in the United States.
We want to open a new path where we can sell oil across various different regions and in different financial markets, utilizing the yuan, the ruble, the euro, and the dollar. With this new market, we can build new parameters and new systems that will enable us to set a stable new oil market, which will guarantee fair and balanced prices. It is very important that a monitoring system can be established to monitor the production and the marketing processes from the 24 countries, including both OPEC and non-OPEC nations.
Telesur's correspondent Hansel Oro joins us now live from Moscow. Hansel, hello. What's the latest on the meeting between Presidents Vladimir Putin and Maduro?
Greetings, Reyes, from Moscow. The meeting between the President of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, and President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, was among the deepening of cooperation among the nations. They were talking about alternatives to financial pressure by the international actors such as the United States. They talked about the media campaign to provoke against Venezuela to provoke an intervention. They also talked about the stabilization of oil prices due to this decrease of oil prices was due to an increase in producing of oil in the United States. The Venezuelan president proposed a currency basket with the Russian ruble and Chinese yuan so as to continue with global oil trade and to stabilize the oil prices. They also stated that not only Venezuela have been affected by the American sanctions, but also Russia. So they had to join together to face these situations. Liquefied natural gas has increased its prices, has been scarcity increased, and they have been looking for different strategy to restabilize the prices. They also were talking about protectionism. Some countries are using this strategy.
Thank you, Hansel. Hansel Oro from Moscow, Russia. And here are some more news from around the world.
Iranian President Hassan Rouhani welcomed his Turkish counterpart Tayyip Erdogan in Tehran to discuss a possible joint response to the highly contested Kurdish vote for independence in Iraq. Both Turkey and Iran joined Baghdad in strongly opposing the yes vote, which went ahead on September 25th. Baghdad has already imposed economic sanctions on Erbil and have begun military exercises around areas bordering the Kurdish autonomous region. Erdogan has threatened to cut off the region's main oil pipeline and, along with Iran, is also threatening economic sanctions. Government officials installed emergency sirens on the island of Bali as Mount Agung continues to show signs of unrest. Warnings over the volcano's eruption, which have been raised to high alert since September, have caused a mass exodus from the island, which relies heavily on tourism.
It was around September 22nd, as residents living in the area fled to shelters. I followed and stayed in the shelters for 4 days. Then I went back, as they said there were sirens. Now I will evacuate only when the sirens go off.
Soldiers who stand accused of carrying out Turkey's failed coup attempt last year are facing a court verdict which is predicted to see a sentence of a life behind bars. The High Court is issuing sentences based on the attempted assassination of the president, breach of the constitution, and membership of an armed terrorist organization. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse calling for the reintroduction of the capital punishment. More than 240 people were killed last July in a failed coup which attempted to overthrow President Erdogan and his ruling Justice and Development Party. Iraqi security forces pushed into ISIS-held Hawaji, which remains one of the last areas of the country the group still holds. With the help of coalition forces in the air and ground troops, which included Iranian-trained Shia troops, federal police, as well as tribal volunteers, the town is slowly falling back into the hands of Baghdad.
We broke the enemy defensive lines and we continue to advance, costing the enemy heavy human and material losses. Now we are in Al-Safra, but within hours we'll be heading on to our next objectives.
British Prime Minister Theresa May was disrupted during her speech at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester when a protester handed her a P45 workers form, a document provided to an employee when they end a work contract. May's government has faced mounting criticism and low approval ratings since her unsuccessful snap election earlier this year, where the Conservatives failed to gain a majority and which saw Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party gain huge support across the country, particularly among younger voters.
We've come to the end of this news brief. These and many other news, you can find them on our telesurtv.net/English, our website. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Ray Gomez. Thank you for watching.